All right, we're continuing our 5th anniversary episode of the Adventures in Advising podcast, and let's welcome back guest host Dr. Melinda Anderson. Hey, Melinda.
Hey, Matt. How are you?
Doing very well, and we have a special guest for this episode to interview, and that's Dr. Kyle Ross, Executive Director of NACADA, the Global Community for Academic Advising. Welcome back, Kyle.
Hey, thanks for having me, and happy 5-year anniversary. That's awesome.
Yes. And how long have you been executive director now? I feel like time has flown.
Yes. So I've been in the role for a year and 4 months now. So yeah, a little over a year. Still learning every day.
Yeah. I know when you were last on the podcast, it was less than a year, and I'm already asking you, what's your perspective? And so now that it's been over a year, I thought it would be nice to kind of revisit that. How's it been starting as executive director to versus now? Has your perspective changed at all?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's going to keep changing like every day. So there are some things that I feel pretty resolved on. Like, okay, we've got a really strong sense of direction with certain things and how we move forward. What I would say my perspective changes on the most any given day is balancing out what is revenue generating to allow for things that are investments to the members to continue to grow. What is a member benefit? So no additional cost to the members, you just get this, versus what is open to the public. So whether you're a member or a non-member, this is open to you. And that balance changes quite a bit, and it depends on each thing. Publications has a very different philosophy compared to online events, compared to our in-person events. So I think that's where my perspective changes the most, is where there are revenue generating opportunities that allows us to be able to continue to do things that are more of an investment or at cost to the association, or to grow things like our own staff. We are still kind of small when we benchmark ourselves to other executive offices of other nonprofits for higher education. So I think we have some room for growth there, but that does mean we have to strike that balance a little differently sometimes. So I think that's where my perspective changes quite a bit. This last year, we looked at online events and said, hey, these are open to the public right now. Let's make these a member benefit. Mm-hmm. Because if a member should get this access to an online event for free, a non-member should either be paying something for it or should become a member to be able to enjoy that benefit as well.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think, just hearing, the different categories, right, that you named, coming into this role. And when you think about, for example, explaining this to members or, even guiding and leading a staff. And I know that you most recently had a business meeting, right? What has been your philosophy in terms of being able to, for example, cast a vision, right? And then being able to share goals then related to like operationalizing them, right? Because, I was reading Inside Higher Ed today, and they were talking about, either universities, coming together in order to save revenue. A lot of people are concerned about enrollments, but I love the way that, even your philosophy of thought around operationalizing, understanding member benefit, versus maximizing, profit potential for the organization in order to be sustained. Like those are really powerful ways to be thinking about the longevity, right? But they're always centered around vision and goals. And so you had a business meeting. And so I don't know if there's anything you would want to share in that business meeting that our listeners would want to know about, because I think organizational strength and sustainability are really important, especially in these times, right? A lot of people are nervous on their campuses. How do I continue to, stay, sharp in my profession, right? As I think about continuing to support students. So if you could just share some thoughts about your business meeting and how that continues to cast a vision for NACADA moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So the annual business meeting is held every year. So that we meet one of our requirements of being a 501c3 organization, and now we present the finances to the membership. So objective one was to talk through the 2023 finances after completing our audit, having filed our 990, and overall we're doing really well financially. In 2023, we generated a profit of about a little over $200,000. And so that's a nice swing from having to survive the pandemic times, which was no fun for any nonprofit association. A lot of us had to dip into reserves. A lot of us had to think through how do we operate differently during that time. And now we're back to flourishing and being successful. So that was a really nice thing to be able to present to the members and say, we're doing great. And so that helps us shape, okay, well, now that we're doing financially well, what does that mean in terms of being able to beef up things that are at cost to the association, but a benefit to the members? So awards, scholarships, different things that we could do to try to make our association as accessible as possible. And then the other piece of the business meeting was we wanted to hold a listening session for folks who joined to be able to share questions, comments, concerns, ideas for the association. We did that last year. That was great. We had about 100 people attend, and I was just typing away, taking notes fast and furious. We wanted to do that again this year. Again, that was successful. Heard some questions and comments around communication of different updates and things that are going on in the association, how to get those more in front of members. So that's helping us think through what information can we get on the website versus our newsletters, like Nakata Next Week and highlights. So that's certainly some really good feedback that we're taking back and saying, okay, we need to rethink some things here. We did have a really great discussion on the globalization of the association, where that's going in the future. The board has supported that we will bring back the international conference in some way, shape, or form in 2026 or 2027 is what we're looking at. But they did say, hey, before we do that, let's really kind of come back to the intention of that international conference. When we look back at 2013, 15, 17, every year we did this, large majority of attendees were folks from the United States. Large majority of presenters for the sessions were folks from the United States. So did we just take a conference that we would typically hold in the United States, put it in a different place? Kind of. And so we want to think through, like, how do we really maximize the engagement of members outside the United States in these conferences, because it's particularly intended for their benefit. And we're bringing the content to them. And so how do we make sure that they're the ones who are generating the content, driving the ideas, so that way we're not overdoing here's the American perspective on academic advising when we share it out there. So the Global Initiatives Committee and the Global Conference Advisory Board have recently merged into one group that's really looking more holistically at how do we maximize the engagement of members outside the United States through virtual engagements, through an international conference. Where does that take us in the future? Some other updates that the board president, Wendy Schindler, also shared were that a couple of task forces were convened in recent times. So one was to establish a definition of academic advising and a scope of practice. Very excited about that work. We have the concept of academic advising, but even that task force recognized at that time there's too many complexities to academic advising. It looks so different in so many institutions across the world. We couldn't possibly establish a definition that worked for everybody. Now, in this role over this year, one of my big learning experiences has been, I think there is still a common thread, even through all those complexities. So how can we find that common thread in the definition that we should be aspiring for? So looking forward to seeing what comes of that, because we do get questions on what is the formal definition of academic advising per Nakata. We say, well, we don't have one, but we have a concept of academic advising that is informed in the teaching and learning paradigm perspective. And I think that when we do establish one, that will help institutions greatly in being really more strategic and intentional about how they want to design advising programs. The other thing was a task force was convened on Nakata elections and appointments. And so the intention was to establish a committee around elections and appointments, so that there would be a group really holistically reviewing eligibility requirements for positions. How do we recruit folks to positions? If it's an elected position versus an appointed position, when we look at appointments, are those processes fair and transparent to those who are interested in those roles? And so really being strategic across all of those things. The way we've done elections has been fairly consistent for several years now. And I think that there's some opportunities for us to say, how do we make sure that we are preparing people for these roles, that they're as fully informed as possible on what positions are available to them and what those requirements are. And then from there, what makes someone really successful in the position, and how do we craft eligibility requirements that are not restrictive, but rather really clear to the person interested. Here's what it takes to be successful in this position. So work is still going on that, but the board did support creating a committee on NACADA elections and appointments, and they're underway on figuring out, well, who's going to be on that committee at the onset. So those are a couple of updates from the board of directors that Wendy shared. And yeah, so that's kind of the ongoing work of the association right now that we shared at the business meeting. And as far as kind of my vision and things that I'm looking at ahead of for the future, my role is helpful in the what can the executive office do to best support the association. So what are the priorities that we can address that are in alignment with the board's strategic plan, that are the things that we can uniquely do for the association, where there's a lot of other great work that the volunteers and members of our association can do. So we say, let them do that while we can really work on this, or how can we support their work as well?
Right. Well, no, I mean, I think, and I'm hoping that, there's a lot of layers and complexity in terms of the internal and then the external, forces, right, that nonprofits are finding themselves in, just given the level of competition for people's times, talents, energy, and monies, right, in terms of what is currently in the playground these days, and so just kudos to the work that, you've done and the board's done. And, Matt and I, were able to sit with Zorana a couple of weeks ago and to hear about the good work that the board has done coming, out of the conference experience. And so, just hearing, coming out of the business meeting. So thank you so much for sharing again with us, a lot of the work that's been happening. So we appreciate that. And thank you again. And kudos, right? It's a lot of work, to try to keep and maintain those balances. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I know I went to like a business meeting years ago, and I think at that time, like you all were passing out like the actual, like, here's how much the we have for the budget for the executive office. And we see that larger number, we're like, wow, NACADA has all this money. And then you start looking at where does all that money go? And I'm like, how does NACADA survive on this? And I guess that leads into a question I have in terms of, and I feel like we talk about this all the time or every year, budget cuts at a lot of institutions, especially like, let's say with California, where I'm at. I know all the CSUs have been told, okay, we're reducing. I mean, we had two Cal States that kind of merged.
Yeah.
And, but then you have like NACADA as an organization and has these leadership positions. Do you fear that, like, with a lot of budget cuts at other institutions and more work that's now placed on these individuals at institutions, that they may want to get involved in an organization like NACADA, but might not now?
Yeah, that's a very real possibility, and we're seeing that across organizations as well, even more broadly than higher education nonprofits. So I'm a member of ASAE, American Society for Association Executives, and one of their conversations that they're talking about a lot and consistently has been creating these micro volunteer opportunities for the folks who can no longer commit to full term to your positions or your positions. Where if you want to get involved right now because the timing is right, you have the support, great, here's what you can do in a very isolated time frame. So I think we need to really spend some more time diving into those conversations a little early on that, because seeing that come up, and I was like, okay, so that's a trend that we're seeing in other organizations. We're not going to be exempt from that in the future. So I think that's something, yes, that we do have to look at. Sometimes there's an opportunity there, though, for members who see that they're not always getting this support from their institution because budgets are real, enrollment cliff is here. We are living in that time right now. That if they're not feeling that support at their institution, then they'll seek NACADA or other organizations to grow their skills, advance themselves. So Haven't seen too much of a dip yet, but we are thinking that that's a very real possibility as institutions are definitely looking at budgets very closely.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I mean, Matt, I appreciate your question because that's definitely, a lot of our conversations too about how do we continue to think about professional development as, not an option, right, but a need, especially as we know that the support around student success work is something that has gained traction in the past couple of years. But then thinking about the political waters or spaces that we are now standing in, right, what kind of impact or implications is that going to have on institutions? So I do appreciate that. And then Kyle, to your point, how do we continue to offer what level of support that people need at the time that they need it? So I do love that concept of even micro volunteering, but then how do you help institutions and members, for whatever they need in this moment, but then also maintain relationships so people know that, that I'm here when you need me. And I think that that's a very powerful way to think about sustainability of any organization or institution at this point. Because Matt, I was reading about mergers and consolidations of institutions this morning. And I've just got to stay away from the Chronicle inside higher ed when I get up in the morning, because I'm just like, what is happening? Like I go to bed at night and then I wake up like, what's happening in higher ed? But, Kyle, that leads us to like our next question around like the direction of academic advising and student success, right? We all these buzzwords, right? Holistic student supports, academic advising. And so you're talking about like, even around the definition of academic advising. And when I think about the work happening in NACADA, driving that conversation, but you're in a field where a lot of people are putting their hands in that work. How do you think that, given the complexity of the environment that you're operating in right now, how do you envision to keep driving those conversations? I mean, we do have a research center in NACADA, and so I think that definitely gives you a leg up where most places do not have something at that level. So I'm just wondering, have you guys given some thought around how do you keep driving and being in front of that conversation with so many people in the sandbox?
Yeah, that's a great question. So two answers to that. First, NACADA needs to start being a little bit bolder in some of the positions that we take. So hence why we're doing that definition of academic advising. This is what NACADA defines as academic advising. Otherwise, when academic advising has historically been undefined, you find that it gets anchored in the institution's priorities, and therefore the institution's priorities define academic advising. And then that leads to inconsistent student experiences over time. If we say that advising is a retention tool, becomes a retention tool, that has implications for what academic advising is structured like and is supported or not. Advising is a teaching and learning tool, then it becomes a different thing. Advising is related to enrollment management, different set of priorities. So if NACADA says this is the definition, that helps avoid that turbulence that we sometimes see with, okay, we're going to change it because new strategic plan, therefore this has to look different. But it should still be linked to institutions' priorities, right? So striking that balance of this is what it should be consistently, but this is also how it can help support the institution's strategic plan and priorities. Other things that we can take bolder positions on, as we look with the research center, as you said, one of the things that we're trying to build out is a data set to help benchmark institutions across, particularly the United States for now, starting with that. Okay, so small private institution, 4-year, here's what the current average is or data shows on centralized versus decentralized, caseloads, faculty, professional advisors, all kinds of different data that you can pull on that. And then that will help us inform some of those bigger questions that we would love to answer, like what is the caseload ratio that NACADA would recommend to an institution? If we don't have that recommendation right now, people keep coming back to the 2011 study where we reported a median and averages, but didn't say that this is the number we recommend. It was just 300 to 1 was the approximate median for large Research One public universities at the time that the study was conducted. But now we're seeing that as other organizations are getting involved, they're hearing those same questions getting asked. And where NACADA said we don't have a recommendation due to too many complexities, then those organizations will say, well, if they're not going to answer it, we will. So I think that if we kind of shift our mentality there and say there are common threads to academic advising, here are those things that NACADA has found, that will help us continue to stay ahead of the curve a little bit.
So, yeah, and I love hearing that because I know at conferences we'll hear that question come up at institutions we work at. That'll come up usually in professional development type places. Like, what is that actual number? And who knows? Maybe there will be one defined. It sounds like at some point. And I know we keep talking about the future, but I wanted to get this question in, and this is actually from Nathan Vickers. So this is his question to you, Kyle. Is when you look back on 2024, what are 3 words that you would use to describe 2024?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, one word is learning. My gosh, I have been learning a lot every day in 2024. Joys of having a strong advising background, but not been an association executive before. That's where my learning curve is at right now. So I would say learning, number 1. 2, change. With new leadership always comes change. I mean, that's just a natural phenomenon in organizations, but we had some catalysts for change this year in the association. One being that the organizational consultant that we contracted to do a holistic review of the association. That was during the time that Melinda was executive director, doing an RFP process and getting that started. Thank you, Melinda. Bostrom has completed that work, submitted a report to the board, and we're taking that in chunks and saying, okay, well, which recommendations do we pursue now? One of those being, for example, that NACADA Elections and Appointments Committee. So some catalysts for change. So, and we've been following through on those pretty quickly and trying to prioritize which recommendations can we pursue now, which ones may need to wait as the organization does go through change. So learning, change, and then the third word is excitement. So folks are really excited for the opportunities that we're providing to them. Folks are always so excited to come to our in-person events. I had the opportunity to go to all the region conferences this year in the annual conference, and just feels like people are like, this is my professional Disneyland. I found it. And so just the excitement in the air there, and being able to engage with their peers and colleagues, especially after several years of not being able to do so in person. So yeah, learning, change.
Excitement. Nice. Learning, change, excitement. LCE. I love that. I love that because I want to capitalize on excitement because Matt and I also wanted to talk to you about the celebration of 50 years of NACADA and the next annual conference, because even coming out of Pittsburgh, which was amazing, by the way. So again, kudos. And we had a really great time. And we're thinking about, Vegas, and so really excited about gathering together. And I agree with you. There was a lot of excitement in Pittsburgh. And you're right about people just being able to gather together, seeing friends that they hadn't seen in a long time, making new friends, new folks coming into the profession. And like you said, finding a home, like you do this work, like I do this work. Oh my God, I found me here, right? And that is just amazing to watch and see that come together. And so what are some thoughts or things that you can share with us about looking towards celebrating 50 years? Because that's significant and awesome and amazing.
It is huge for us, and we're so excited. And the nice thing about our organization is we kind of have 2 sets of anniversaries, right? We've got the anniversary of the annual conference. So that one was in 2027. First annual conference was in 1977. So 50th year of the annual conference at that point. And then NACADA was officially chartered as an organization in 1979. So we hit 2029 for the 50th year of the overall establishment of the organization. So we get an opportunity to continue to celebrate NACADA's birthday over a set of several years.
Nice.
Yeah. So very excited for that work. We're a little early in those conversations right now, but I think what I've seen from how other organizations celebrate, and certainly things that I want to take back to NACADA with, is one, celebrating our history, right? So honoring the history of the establishment of the annual conference, the chartering of the organization, all the accomplishments over 50 years, growing from a few people to 14,000 members. Huge. Celebrating accomplishments of all the different communities that have been established, the other events and resources that we offer, proliferation of publications and online education. So really honoring the past, and then celebrating in that moment. So really then taking the time to say, here we are now in the present, celebrate where we're at right now, and then looking towards that future. So what kinds of exciting things can we be rolling out at that point for people to say, now I see where NACADA is going to be in the next 50 years after that, as we look towards the 100th year anniversary way down the road. So I think part of that is that continued professionalization of academic advising. So once we establish that definition, that also has some impacts towards, well, then that can inform things like reviewing our core values, core competencies, maybe establishing a code of ethics. And then what else does that mean for what advisors can look at and say, now I'm demonstrating my learning, and NACADA is able to document that learning as a result of being able to directly relate it to a definition to these competencies. That's something that's currently missing in the association. A lot of times members don't have that opportunity to say, see, here's the thing that shows I learned this. Have that right now with micro-credentials and digital badges, but what else can we be doing to help advisors be able to demonstrate advancement of their competencies in academic advising and the justification for maybe advancement or looking towards future roles.
Nice. I'm excited.
Very
Me
much
too.
so. I think going along those lines, I think this could be a great question to connect with. That is, what's your message to NACADA members, or even listeners of the podcast that more than likely are NACADA members, as we start 2025? What's your general message?
General message is really center in on your why, of why you are an academic advisor and in the profession. I know folks have a lot of anxieties going into 2025 with budgets and institutions. The enrollment cliff is here. National Student Clearinghouse has been publishing some really fascinating data with that. But there always is opportunities in some of those places where we see anxiety. So enrollment cliff. What we're also noticing is that enrollment cliff is being made up for by different demographics. One being dual enrolled students. So students who are in high school and then also completing college coursework at the same time. What does that mean for the profession? How can academic advisors deepen their knowledge around advising that population? And then there's students who decided, I'm not going to go to college while it's virtual in the pandemic time. And now are thinking, okay, now it's the right time for me to enroll. So National Student Clearinghouse, as affectionately call those, the pandemic stockouts. One just said, this isn't the right time for me now, I'm coming back. So what I think we're going to have an opportunity to dialogue around how does advising look a little different in terms of being able to tailor itself to those populations. So I'm really excited for that in 2025. But centering on your why are you in this role? Why do you love the profession so much? Why do you love working with students and their success? Will help you remind yourself, even during those times where you're feeling stress and anxiety around your institution's budget and overall fiscal health, changing trends in higher education overall. So focus on that, and that should help you continue into your future too.
Wonderful. Well, look, it's always good to have a message of hope, right? As you go into the new year, I always have a New Year's resolution. Matt, we've always joked about this. My New Year's resolutions that never really pan out. They kind of peter out like around February. But I do, Kyle, I do appreciate your message of hope, and, for people to center on their why and to remember, why you do what you love and how that can accelerate you in those moments, and then to lean into your community. So absolutely, which is, one of those reasons why we're all together here today in this podcast, this community. So, Matt, this is me, throwing that question back at you. Matt, what are you looking forward into the new year? What is the message of that you would like to share with the listeners about what you're looking forward into the new year?
No, that's a great question. And I should have prepared for that. I should have known Melinda's going to ask me something.
We did this last time we were together, and I was like, oh, Matt, that's a great question. So now I was prepared for you this podcast.
No, I mean, I think going along with what Kyle's saying, I really hope, whether you're listening to the podcast as a NACADA member, or just a general listener about it, higher ed, is that a lot of these things happen. There's, highs and lows, but we'll get through it. And we just got to really band together and work with one another and just have that hope and believe in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that we can lead to a good 2025.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well stated, Matt.
Thank you.
I feel like you should host a podcast or something.
We need a site as well, so mark in 2024.
Yeah.
So we're going to be stealing that quote from you now.
Well, I appreciate you both being on the podcast for this, especially also to celebrate 5 years of the podcast. And
absolutely.
None of this would have happened without NACADA, without the both of you, without Charlie. So I really appreciate all of you.
Well, so I'm going to ask a question now, and that's like, hold on, I'm the host. I'm the one who asks the question. I'm going to ask a question. So it's the 5-year anniversary. So what are you looking forward to for Adventures in Advising? So what are you doing to celebrate now? We're all here, but then what are you looking forward to in the future for the podcast?
Wow, the tables have turned. What is going on?
Yes.
I don't know. I never thought we'd get past 5 episodes of this podcast. I was sharing with Megumi earlier or last week is that, I was reading that the average lifespan of a podcast is usually 6 months and average episodes is usually around 50. But when you kind of look deeper into what that median number is, because you have so many different podcasts, it's usually 10 or less before podcast fades out. And so the fact that it kept going, I think showed that there was a need, especially during the pandemic times. And even just coming out of it, it's well, the podcast is still here. We have access to this technology, being able to interview people and share their stories. And the nice thing is with this podcast, it at some point, I'm sure it will end, but there's so many stories to still tell. And so that's, in a sense, what is going to keep this podcast going for as long as it goes. But yeah, I look forward to having more guest hosts this year, to have more new faces and voices on this podcast. And I don't know, I have a few other things in mind, but I'm usually one that I don't like talking about it till it actually happens. So I'll keep those up here right now.
Fair enough.
I do enjoy your surprises, Matt. I will say that. But again, congratulations. And absolutely, I agree. There was a need and you met that need and you met it brilliantly. And I just appreciate always the hard work, because I know it is hard work, just the organization and the scheduling. But I love how people are always willing to step up to the mic and to be interviewed by you. And I think that says a lot about who you are. So thank you so much for, offering opportunities to host with you. And Kyle, thank you so much for being willing to let us interview you and to hear more about what's happening in the organization and how you'll continue to be leading us forward in this work and the professionalization of advising. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And it was really great to see you all. And congratulations again. Happy 5-year anniversary.
And before we end the recording, I just want to say, kind of going along the lines of people willing to be on the podcast. So Belinda, it was the last day of the Pittsburgh conference and literally end of the last keynote and, saying goodbye to Kyle. And then I was like, oh, by the way, it's been almost a year. Do you want to be on the podcast again? And without hesitation, he was like, just tell me when and where, I gotcha.
I will always be my answer.
Yeah. I appreciate you both. Thank you.
You are so welcome.